I'm Marty Nemko. Thanksgiving kicks off the so-called season of giving, and that phrase's unspoken next words are to the less fortunate, the season of giving to the less fortunate, or some such. That concept is viewed as non-controversial as apple pie, but it may merit a bit of examination. An under-discussed foundational belief in all of us is whether it's wise to give more to those with the greatest deficit or to those with the greater potential to make a difference. And there are solid arguments on both sides. I'm going to try to present both. I'm going to alternate. First, I'll start with those advocating additional redistribution to the pool of people with the greatest deficit. And that argument is that a society cannot be moral if it allows so much income inequality. Now I'm going to make the argument on the other side, which is that whatever additional redistribution should occur to the pool of people with greater potential. So, yes, a society cannot be moral that allows so much income inequality, but that's but one moral factor. Others need to be considered. For example, those would-be redistributed billions of dollars in the hands of the wealthy and companies are more likely to be used to develop or provide products or services that benefit us all, for example, to treat or cure disease, or to enrich our lives, for example, GPS, Google search, the smartphone, and so on. Meanwhile, programs that serve the poor have unfortunately yielded disappointing results for all the taxpayer dollars, the most painful share of which is borne by the middle and working class. Despite $22 trillion spent over the last half-century, the achievement gap remains about as wide as ever. The Head Start program is perhaps most disappointing. The Obama administration, which was a strong supporter of it, commissioned a meta-evaluation of studies of Head Start, and alas, it found that Head Start makes no enduring difference. Now I'm going to switch back to an argument in favor of giving to, as they say, the least among us, the neediest, or those with the greatest deficit. And that argument is that the wealthy and companies already have more than enough money for their initiatives. The counter to that is, to assert that is to argue that more money isn't needed, for example, in the fight against cancer, or in Apple's R&D budget. The counter to that, for those who want more redistribution to the neediest, is sure that money might accelerate development, but with certainty, redistributing more money from the haves to the have-nots helps ensure that the poor will eat better, have better housing, and health care. The counter to that is, but at what cost? That's not just the aforementioned slowing of R&D, but a society that punishes the successful to reward the less successful can't yield net good in the long run. One of psychology's most proven principles is that you get more of what you reward, less of what you punish. The counter to that is, no one is saying we should take all the money and incentives from the haves. The counter to that is, well, we already have a system in which the top 1% of earners already pay 39% of the federal income tax. The top 10% pay 71% of the tax, and the bottom 45.5% of households pay no tax at all. The counter to that is, that's appropriate for another reason, to compensate for past injustices. The counter to that is, that encourages a culture of avoiding individual responsibility in favor of externalities, even those externalities so far in the past that their effect on a person is smaller than current factors, such as how diligent the person is in school and in work, and whether he or she resists drug abuse, and so on. Every group could blame lack of success on past externalities. For example, enslaved blacks, 19th century prejudice against Irish immigrants, early 20th century treatment of Chinese immigrants, East Indians subjected to the British Raj, Japanese Americans interned in World War II, Jewish Holocaust survivors, immigrant survivors of the Vietnam War, and today's remaining prejudice against people of color, against LGBTs, against even unattractive people. It's easier for many people to assert that they deserve more redistribution because of extrinsic factors than it is to look inward and take responsibility for their actions and self-improvement. A society that encourages external locus of control may end up worse, even if many claims of prejudice are legitimate. The counter to that is, you're devaluing the moral injustice of income inequality, in which CEOs earn millions and own mansions and yachts, while millions of other Americans live with 3 roommates amid squalor and with marginal health care. The counter to that is, putting aside that only a tiny fraction of people make millions, I earlier stipulated to that being a moral problem, but that it's unwise to let that trump all the aforementioned factors, as well as some others. For example, can it be moral when an applicant to a prestigious college or job is denied because he or she is Asian or white rather than black or Latino? Is that fair to the more qualified person? Is it fair to the fellow students, co-workers, and larger society that thus is saddled with people with weaker records of achievement, and therefore are less likely to produce high-quality products and services for us all? And what would you say to an Asian or to a white who was rejected because of her or his race? The counter to that is, I'd say it's the price we pay for a more just society. When things are fairer, such policies will no longer be necessary. The counter to that, more equal doesn't necessarily mean fairer or more just. In response to such a statement, those rejected people might say nothing but quietly feel aggrieved and angry, perhaps more resentful and less supportive of society's have-nots than had those rejected people been judged on the merits. The quiet backlash is likely growing until it won't be quiet anymore. The counter to that, merit need be more broadly defined than grades, test scores, and successful experience. Not only does racial and socioeconomic diversity add to the quality of colleges and workplaces, it's the only way to avoid the hopelessness that comes from being one of the millions of the multi-generational poor, a problem exacerbated by capitalism, in which, faced with automation and offshoring, only a small percentage of Americans can compete for good jobs. The counter to that, you claim that those subtler determinants of a person's quality make them better contributors to their college or workplace. Let's see if you really feel that way. Imagine you had heart disease and had a choice between seeing a cardiologist who got into medical school because of top grades and test scores, passed the cardiology board exam with high honors, and had excellent reviews on Yelp. Your other choice was a cardiologist who was admitted to medical school under lowered criteria because he or she came from a disadvantaged background and didn't pass the cardiology boards with high honors and mediocre Yelp reviews. Wouldn't you want to see the first doctor? Now multiply that decision by the millions of decisions made every year on whom to admit to college or graduate school, whom to hire, whom to promote. Can you see why yet more redistribution to the have-nots, whether in college admissions, hiring, or taxation for redistributive programs for the poor, while yes, yielding some benefit, is a net negative? The counter to that is, you're ignoring the human, the emotion, the soul. Even if it is a net negative, I'd rather live in a world that takes resources from the haves to ensure that all people, by virtue of being human, are entitled to live outside of poverty. The takeaway. Before watching and listening to this, did you believe that compared with the status quo, more or less should be redistributed to the people with the greatest deficit? Have you changed your mind at all? What do you think now? Do you want to donate more or less in this season of giving? Thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko.